The wind in the Montana Territory did not ask permission. It came down from the north in the late 1880s with a sound like a grieving giant. Hitting the Callahan Valley first, it found the high pines and made them scream, then dropped to scourge the valley floor, looking for anything that stood against it. It found the main barn of the Callahan Ranch and pushed. The barn, built of heavy timbers meant to last a century, groaned under the assault. Snow, fine and hard as sand, blasted against the weathered wood, finding every crack. Inside the house, Nate Callahan did not look up from his coffee. He was a man in his 30s, built with the kind of stillness that was often mistaken for calm. It was not calm, it was control. He had spent years in rooms with railroad barons, men who moved markets with a whisper, and he had learned to build his own walls. Now, his walls were made of mountains, and his only companions were the horses he raised and the wind that hammered his solitude. He listened to the shudder of the beams in his own house, a solid structure of mahogany and stone that should not have shuddered at all. The storm was 3 days old. This was worse than the last one. He put on his heavy coat, the wool thick and smelling of horse and smoke, and pulled his hat low. The wind met him at the door like a physical blow, trying to shove him back inside. He leaned into it, his gaze already fixed on the sprawling barn. The new snow was knee-deep, burying the memory of the hailstorm that had preceded it. That was the storm that had nearly killed Jet. He trudged through the drifts, his long legs sinking deep. The sky was a low, bruised purple. He reached the barn door and had to put his shoulder into it, fighting the snow packed against the bottom. Inside, the air was warmer, thick with the scent of hay, manure, and the sharp tang of horse. But it was not peaceful. The horses stamped and shifted in their stalls, their breath pluming in the dim light. They felt the pressure of the storm, the way the world was shrinking and tightening around them. Nate walked down the line, his hand out, touching a muzzle here, a neck there. His voice was low. Easy, just wind. But it was not just wind. He reached the far end stall, the one he had reinforced himself. Jet stood inside, a black stallion that was almost too much horse for this valley, or any valley. The animal was the color of a starless night, and just as volatile. 3 weeks ago, Nate had found him. The hailstorm had come out of nowhere. Ice balls as big as a man's fist, and a rotted support beam in the old calving shed had snapped. Nate had found the stallion pinned, a jagged piece of timber, a splintered rafter, driven deep into his flank. The horse had been screaming, a sound of terror and agony that cut through the roar of the ice. Any other rancher would have put a bullet in him. The wound was catastrophic. Nate had spent 2 hours in the collapsing shed, the hail pounding his own back raw, talking to the horse. He had worked with rope and a handsaw, the horse's blood hot on his hands, soaking his sleeves. He had cut him free, half dragged, half carried the massive animal through the mud and ice to the main barn. He had stitched the wound himself, his hands, usually so steady, shaking with the cold and the effort. He had not slept for 2 days, sitting with the stallion, cleaning the wound, forcing water and mash down his throat, waiting for the fever to break. Jet turned his head as Nate approached. The wound was healing, a long, ugly scar that puckered the sleek black hide. The horse was alive. He was damaged, but he was alive. Nate ran a hand down the powerful neck. Jet leaned into the touch, a low rumble in his chest. It was the closest thing to gratitude Nate expected from any living creature, and it was more than enough. He checked the stitches, the new pink skin. It would hold. He had protected this. He left the barn, resecuring the door against the storm, and looked at the damage again. The wind had torn a section of the roof off the hayloft. Snow was piling inside, ruining a season's worth of feed. The paddock fences were down in 3 places. The small cabin he kept for seasonal help he had not hired in 2 years had a collapsed porch. He walked back to the main house. It was a fortress, built with money he no longer counted, but it felt like a tomb. He walked through the main room, the mahogany shining dull in the gray light, a library with books he never read, a dining table that could seat 20, though he always ate standing in the kitchen. It was empty. The house was vast, and it was empty. The town, a clutch of buildings 10 miles down the valley, knew him as the millionaire in the mountains. They whispered about him in the general store, wondering what had driven a man with that much Eastern money to live like a hermit. Had he killed a man, lost a woman, gone mad? Nate did not care. He kept his distance. He bought supplies, paid in cash, spoke little, and rode out. He was closer to the dirt under his boots than to any person in that town. The land did not ask questions. The horses did not judge. The wind, at least, was honest. He was stoking the fire, the wood snapping, when a shadow fell across the doorway. Nate did not flinch, but his hand stopped. He did not get visitors. Take stood there, a man who moved like the wind Nate had been fighting. He was Apsaluk, a warrior and a scout, and he was the only man Nate Callahan called a friend. Take did not knock. He simply appeared, his moccasins silent on the floorboards. He was lean, his face a map of the mountains he knew better than any white man. He held a rifle in the crook of his arm. He looked at Nate, then at the fire. "You use too much wood," he said. His voice was quiet, like stones rubbing together. "It is my wood," Nate replied, turning back to the flames. Take walked to the window. Ignoring the snow, he dripped on the expensive rug. He looked out at the valley. Though there was nothing to see but a wall of white, he was reading the storm. "This one has teeth." "I noticed." "It is not the last," Take said. He turned, his dark eyes fixing on Nate. "The beaver built their dams high this year. The elk came down from the high country before the first snow. This is a hard winter." Nate nodded. He respected Take's knowledge. It was older than his, deeper. "I saw the signs." "Your barn will not last this winter," Take observed, his gaze shifting past Nate, toward the mountain. "It will last," Nate said, a defensive edge to his voice. Take said nothing, which was worse. He looked at Nate, at the fine lines of fatigue around his friend's eyes, the tension in his shoulders that had been there for 2 years. "One man," Take said. A simple statement of fact. Too much land, too much house, too much storm. Nate looked at his hands. They were strong hands, calloused and capable. They had saved his horse. They had built his fences. They were, at this moment, chapped and sore and unequal to the task ahead. The ranch was too big. The damage was too great. The solitude he had cultivated as a shield was now a liability. Take watched his friend. He understood honor. He understood freedom. He did not, he thought, fully understand the white man's particular brand of pride, the kind that made a man build a cage for himself and call it a home. "I am going north," Take said, pulling his blanket coat tighter. "Checking the passes for my people. Be back in 2 weeks, maybe 3. He paused. "Do not die. Too much trouble to bury you in this ground." Nate almost smiled. "Do not get lost." Take gave a sharp nod and was gone. The room felt even bigger after he left, the silence heavier. Nate sat at the massive desk. The feeling of being overwhelmed was one he despised. It tasted of failure. It tasted of the life he had left behind. A life of ledgers and expectations and the crushing weight of other people's ambitions. He had come here to be free, to be self-sufficient. But the barn was broken. The hay was rotting. Jet was safe, but the rest of his stock was not. And the winter, as Take had promised, was only beginning. He looked at his hands again. He was one man. He opened a drawer and took out a piece of paper and a pencil. His pride felt like a stone in his gut, but he pushed it down. Survival was more important than pride. He had learned that much from the horse. He wrote, his handwriting clear and strong, without flourish. He would ride into town tomorrow, regardless of the snow. and post this on the board outside the general store." He looked at the words. "Help needed, cleaning barns and cabin." He paused, thinking of the whispers, the questions, the invasive curiosity of the town. He thought of having to explain himself, his past, his reasons. He could not stomach it. He added 4 more words. Day wages, no questions asked. He would post it, and he would deal with whatever broken soul the wind blew his way. He folded the paper, the decision made, and as if in reply, a gust of wind hit the house so hard the windows rattled in their frames, and the lonely, cold sound of it filled the empty spaces of his home. Nate rode into town 2 days later, the note in his pocket. The wind had finally tired itself out, leaving behind a world that was scoured and still. The sky was a pale, aching blue, and the snow on the valley floor was so bright it hurt his eyes. He had cleared his own path to the main road, his shoulders burning from the work. The town was quiet, plumed smoke rising in straight columns from every chimney. He tied his horse outside the general store, the animal stamping and blowing clouds of steam in the cold. He ignored the curtain that twitched in the window of the assayer's office next door. He was used to the scrutiny. He pulled the note from his pocket, the pencil-written words stark on the white paper. He unfolded it and reached for the tack he had left there last season. He felt the eyes on him as he pressed the paper flat against the rough wood of the notice board. He was aware of his coat, of finer wool than any man here wore, and the way he did not look at the men shoveling snow from the boardwalk. He was a presence, an anomaly, and his request for help was a crack in his armor. He could feel their curiosity like an itch. He pressed the tack in with his thumb, hard, and turned away without looking back. He untied his horse, mounted in one smooth motion, and rode out, the town receding in his shadow. He did not expect anyone to come. The notice was a concession to logic, but his gut told him he was, as always, on his own. He would fix the barn himself. It would just take longer. 3 mornings later, he was wrong. He was in the barn, checking the wrap on Jet's leg, when a movement at the door made him look up. The stallion sensed it too, his head snapping up, ears forward. A figure stood silhouetted against the bright, cold morning. It was small, smaller than a man. As his eyes adjusted, he saw it was a woman. She was wrapped in a gray cloak. The wool so faded and worn, it seemed to have absorbed the color of the snow and the sky. Her face was hidden in the shadow of the hood. Nate rose slowly to his full height, his hand still on Jet's neck. He did not speak. She stepped inside, her boots shuffling on the straw-covered floor. She pulled the hood back. She was not old, but she was not young. Her face was thin, her cheekbones high and stark, her skin chapped raw by the wind. Her eyes were the color of the sky just before the wind had hit, a deep, bruised purple, and they were exhausted. They met his, held for a second, and then dropped to the floor. "You the one who posted the notice?" she said. It was not a question. Her voice was low and rough, as if she had not used it much that day. "I am," Nate said. "It says day wages, no questions." "It does." She looked up again, and this time her gaze was direct. There was a desperate, brittle strength in it. "I am here for the work." Nate looked at her. He saw the thinness of her coat, the way her hands, raw and red, were clasped in front of her. They were hands that had seen too much lye soap and ice. He had expected a drifter, a broken-down cowboy, someone he could understand. "The work is hard," he said, his voice flat. "It is mucking out stalls, patching a roof. It is not woman's work." A flicker of something anger, maybe, or just pure weariness passed over her face. "It is work. I am not asking for a favor. I am asking for the job you posted. Or did the no questions part only apply to men?" Nate was silent for a long moment. He studied her. She did not fidget. She did not beg. She just stood there, a small, gray rock in the middle of his barn, waiting for him to either accept her or tell her to leave. He thought of Take, who had seen her walking the road just as he was riding out, a mile from the ranch. Take had paused his horse, watching her, then had ridden back to Nate, who was splitting wood. "A person is coming," Take had said, his eyes on the road. "A woman." "I am not blind," Nate said. "She carries a heavy pack, not on her back." Take said. He had nodded, a gesture of respect and pity. "The ones who carry gurneys like that, they do not stay in one place, not when the burden is heavier than the wind." And with that, Take had turned his horse for good and pointed him toward the high passes, leaving Nate to face the wind and its burdens alone. Now, looking at the woman, Nate understood what his friend had meant. "My name is Nate Callahan," he said, finally. "Linda Rock," she replied. He nodded once, toward the back of the barn. "The stalls need mucking. The hayloft is breached. Snow is in the feed. The cabin porch is collapsed. Take your pick." "I will start with the stalls," she said. She unclasped her cloak, and he saw that underneath she wore a simple wool dress, just as worn, and a man's coat that was too big for her. She folded the cloak with a precise, automatic movement and set it on a clean bale of hay. She looked around, found a pitchfork, and went to the first stall. Nate watched her for a minute. She did not look at him again. She just worked. He turned and went back to Jet. Linda Rock worked like nothing he had ever seen. She worked like a machine, a piece of equipment that had been set to a task and would not stop until it was broken or the task was done. She did not pause. She did not rest. She did not wipe her face or lean on the pitchfork. She moved from stall to stall, her movements efficient, economical. There was no wasted energy. She was small, but she used her weight, leveraging the fork with a practiced rhythm. She hauled the heavy barrows of soiled straw out to the frozen manure pile, her boots slipping on the ice, but she never fell. When she finished the stalls, she moved to the one where Jet had been wounded. The floorboards were stained dark with old blood, a place Nate had avoided cleaning. He had just thrown fresh straw over it. Linda stopped and looked at it. She went to the pump, her shoulders working as she forced the frozen handle up and down until water gushed out. She found a bucket and a stiff brush. She got down on her hands and knees in the freezing mud and water, and she scrubbed. She scrubbed the wood until her knuckles were white and the dark stain had faded to a memory. Nate watched her from the other end of the barn, pretending to braid a rein. He watched the rigid set of her back. She was not just cleaning a stain, she was trying to erase it. He went into the house around noon. He made coffee and cut 2 thick slices of bread, piling one with cold beef. He brought the mug and the plate out to the barn. "You should eat," he said, holding it out. She was coiling a rope. She stopped, but she did not turn to him. "I am fine." "It is noon," he said, his voice hard. "You are paid for the day. That includes a noon meal." It was a lie, but it was the only way he could think to make her take it. She slowly turned. Her eyes fell on the plate. She looked at the thick slice of beef, and for a fleeting, terrible second, he saw a hunger so deep it was almost violent. Then it was gone. She looked back at him, her face a mask. "I have my own," she said. She walked to her gray cloak and took out a small tin box. She opened it. Inside was half a slice of dry bread and a small wedge of hard cheese. She picked up the bread. Nate looked at the plate in his hand. He felt like a fool. He felt like a king who had just offered a crumb to a queen. "This is better," he said, gruffly. "It is kind of you, Mr. Callahan," she said, her voice flat. "But I will eat mine." She took a small bite of the bread. He watched her chew, slowly, deliberately. She did not look at the plate he was holding. The confrontation hung in the cold air, a silent battle of wills. His impulse to protect, to provide, was slamming against a wall of pride so high and thick he could not see the top of it. He set the plate and the mug down on a bale of hay. "It is here if you change your mind," he said. He turned and walked out of the barn, his jaw tight. When he came back an hour later, the plate and mug were exactly where he had left them, untouched. She was on the roof of the small cabin, nailing a piece of tin over a hole, the hammer stroke steady and sure. She worked until the sun began to dip behind the western mountains, painting the snow in shades of orange and blood. The light in the valley was fading. She climbed down from the roof, her movements stiff. She gathered her cloak and went to the pump to wash her hands, breaking the skin of ice in the trough with her fist. She came to him where he stood in the barn doorway, watching the light die. "I am finished for the day," she said. "There is a cabin," he said, nodding toward the small building she had just been patching. "The one for hired help. The stove is good. You can stay there. It is a long walk to town in this cold." She looked at the cabin, then back at him. "Thank you, but I have a place." "It will be dark in 30 minutes, and the temperature is dropping." "I am used to the dark," she said. She pulled her hood up, her face disappearing again into the shadows. "I will be back tomorrow, if the work is still there." "The work is there," he said. He watched her walk away. She did not look back. She just a small, gray figure moving across a vast, white landscape, growing smaller and smaller, until the twilight swallowed her whole. He stood there for a long time. The silence of the ranch rushed in, louder than the wind had been. That night, for the first time in 2 years, the emptiness of his house felt different. It was not the clean, chosen solitude he had cultivated. It felt cold. It felt mean. He sat by the fire, but he was not warm. He thought of the half a piece of bread in the tin box. He thought of her scrubbing the blood stain. He thought of her walking off into the impossible cold. A new kind of unease had settled on him, a curiosity that was sharp and unwelcome. Where did she go? Who was she saving that other half of bread for? He knew, as he banked the fire and went to his cold bed, that a line had been crossed. He had posted a notice to solve a simple problem of physics: too much work. One man. The world had answered by sending him a riddle wrapped in a gray cloak. The next day, the whispers started. He rode into town for grain, and the silence in the general store was different. It was not just the usual, "Here comes the hermit" silence. It was heavier, thicker, laced with something new. Mr. Henderson, the proprietor, measured out his oats, his eyes down. That will be $2. Mr. Callahan. "Put it on my account," Nate said. "Of course." Henderson cleared his throat, a nervous, reedy sound. "Heard you, hired some help up at the ranch." Nate's gaze was level. "I did." "A woman," Henderson said, the word coming out like a small pop. "Folks are saying you hired a woman to do men's work." Martha, the large, sharp-nosed wife of his nearest neighbor, Jed, had been pretending to inspect a bolt of calico. She turned, her face a mask of moral judgment. "It is not decent, Mr. Callahan. A woman, alone, up at a man's ranch. What will people think?" "I do not much care what people think, Martha," Nate said, his voice quiet. He picked up his sack of grain as if it weighed nothing and slung it over his shoulder. "But she is a stranger," Henderson sputtered. "We do not know her people." "She works," Nate said. He turned to leave. "That is all I need to know." He walked out, the silence of the store at his back. He knew what they were thinking. He knew the small, ugly shape of their conclusions. They saw a woman, and they saw a rich, solitary man, and they put the two together in the only way their small minds knew how. It was a complication. It was a new, unwelcome tie to the town he despised. But as he rode out, the seat of conflict was not just with the town. It was in his own barn. He thought of the untouched plate of food. He thought of her pride, a thing as stark and unforgiving as the landscape. And he thought of his own stubborn, insistent need to fix what was broken: a horse's flank, a cabin roof, a woman walking into the dark. He had a feeling this new problem would not be solved with a hammer or a needle. The days settled into a rhythm, as hard and spare as the land itself. Linda Rock arrived just as the gray light of dawn broke over the eastern ridge, and she left when the last of the sun's blood-orange light slipped from the sky. She was a ghost in a gray cloak, bookending his days. She did not just work, she restored. She moved from the stalls to the hayloft, patching the roof with tin Nate salvaged from the collapsed shed. She restacked the entire loft, clearing out the snow-soaked, ruined hay and saving what was dry. Her silence was as profound as the snow. She never hummed, never spoke to herself, never seemed to rest. Nate took to watching her. He told himself it was to supervise the work, but it was a lie. He watched her from the window of his house as she moved. He watched her when he was in the barn, pretending to check tack. He saw that she never stopped for a noon meal. She would go to the pump, break the ice, and drink deep, her throat working. That was all. She drank water and the cold air, and seemed to subsist on them. At the end of the first week, he walked out to the cabin. She was sweeping the porch she had just finished rebuilding. The sun was setting, and the cold was biting. "That is good work, Miss Rock," he said. She stopped sweeping, her hands tight on the broom handle. She did not look at him. "It is what you pay me for." He pulled a small leather pouch from his pocket. He counted out the coins. "This is the wage we agreed on." He held it out. She pulled off one of his gloves, the leather dark with her sweat, and held out her hand. Her palm was raw, but healing. He dropped the coins into it. She did not count them. "And this," he said, holding out 2 more silver dollars. "For the extra hours, for the roof." Her eyes snapped up. Meeting his, they were cold, and just as purple as the bruised twilight. "No," she said. "It is fair payment," he said, his voice hardening. "The wage was agreed," she repeated. "I do not take more." "It is a bonus. It is not charity." "It is more than the wage," she said, as if that was the end of all argument. "I will be back tomorrow." She turned, put the broom against the cabin wall, and walked past him. Her head high, the small jingle of coins in her pocket the only sound she made. Nate stood there, the 2 silver dollars heavy in his hand, feeling the sting of a rejection he could not quite understand. He was a man who moved markets, who had bent the wills of railroad barons. He was being thwarted by a slip of a woman in a faded gray cloak. His frustration followed him into the house. He was a rich man. What was the point of money if it could not fix a simple problem? She was hungry. He had food. She was cold. He had shelter. He acted without thinking, driven by that same blunt impulse that had made him save Jet. He went to his pantry, a room stocked for a 6-month siege. He pulled out a 50-pound sack of flour, a whole side of bacon, 2 large bars of lye soap, and a tin of coffee. He carried it all, the flour sack heavy on his shoulder, through the snow to the small cabin. He did not put it on the porch. He put it inside, where she stored her cloak, where she would have to see it. He told himself it was not charity. It was supplies. It was an advance. It was... He did not know what it was, but he left it. The next morning, he rose before dawn. He was at the window, coffee in hand, when he saw her figure emerge from the trees. She did not go to the barn. She went to the cabin. He watched. She was inside for less than a minute. Then she came out. She made one trip, then another, carrying his offerings. She stacked them neatly on the front porch of his own house. The flour sack, the bacon, the soap, the coffee. She did not knock. She did not wait. She turned and walked to the barn to begin her day's work. When Nate went to the porch, his jaw tight with a cold anger, he found a small piece of brown paper, torn from a sack, on top of the flour. It was weighted down with a small, smooth river stone. On it, in neat, careful pencil, were a few words. "Please do not. I work to live. I do not take charity." He crushed the paper in his fist. He hauled the supplies back to his pantry, his anger warring with a grudging, painful respect. He found himself in the barn, watching her. She was trying to secure a loose gate in the wind, her bare hands fumbling with the frozen rope. She winced as her raw skin split again on the hemp. He went back to the house. He found an old pair of his own work gloves. They were leather, stained with oil and horse sweat, but they were sound. The lining was intact. He did not leave them in the cabin. He went to the barn, to the hook where she hung her cloak. He did not say a word. He just left them there, hanging next to the gray wool. He watched. When she came in to get her cloak at dusk, she saw them. She stopped. She touched one of the leather fingers. She looked over to where he was grooming Jet, her expression hidden in the shadows. He did not look up. She stood there for a full minute. Then, slowly, she took the gloves, put them on, and worked her fingers into them. They were comically large, bunching at her wrists. But she clenched her fists. A small, decisive movement. She did not say thank you. She just left. The next morning, she was wearing them. Her movements were less pained. The fragile, invisible thread between them held. It was 3 days later that the boy came. Nate was in the barn, checking Jet's scar, which was healing clean. He heard a soft sound, a boot on snow. He looked up, expecting Linda, but it was too early. A small boy stood in the doorway. He looked to be about 8 years old, with a thin face and a shock of brown hair. He wore a coat that was clearly a man's. The sleeves rolled up a half-dozen times, making his arms look thick and strange. He held a small, rough, woven basket. Nate froze. He was not a man who knew children. "You are on private property. Son!" The boy did not flinch. He just looked at Nate with an unnerving stillness. His eyes, Nate saw with a jolt, were Linda's. That same deep, bruised purple, that same exhaustion. "Mister," the boy said, his voice a thin reed. "What is it?" Nate said, his voice gruffer than he intended. The boy walked forward, his eyes darting around the barn, at the massive horses, at the clean stalls. He held out the basket. "Ma said not to come empty-handed," he said, his voice barely a whisper. Nate looked into the basket. Inside, nestled on a bed of dry grass, were 6 small, speckled eggs. They were pullet eggs, small and precious. "Ma." The word hit Nate like a stone. He looked at the boy, then at the eggs. This was not charity. This was not a plea. It was a transaction. It was an offering of thanks for the gloves. It was a gesture of pride, a way to balance the scales. He felt a strange, unfamiliar warmth spread through his chest, a feeling so alien he almost recovered. He reached out and took the basket. The boy's small, chapped hand was trembling. "Tell your ma. Tell her thank you," Nate said. "These are good eggs." The boy gave a single, sharp nod, as if a great weight had been lifted from him. He turned and ran, his oversized coat flapping, disappearing as silently as he had arrived. Nate stood holding the basket, the eggs a tiny, tangible proof of a life he could not see. The illusion of his isolation was shattered. It was shattered again when he rode to town 2 days later for hinges. The whispers that had followed him before were now a low, ugly murmur. He heard the name Raymond. He heard it in the saloon, where he had gone to find the blacksmith. 2 men at the bar, drifters, were talking. "He is a mean one, that Raymond," one said, wiping his mouth. "Flashing silver and asking about a woman and her brats." "He says they are his," the other said, lowering his voice. "Says she stole them. Says he will pay $50 to anyone who tells him where she is holed up." Nate's blood went cold. He paid for the hinges and left, the saloon falling silent as he passed. He was almost to his property line when he saw the single horse, half hidden in the pines on the ridge. The rider was still just watching. Nate stopped his own horse. He was too far to be seen clearly, but he felt the weight of the man's gaze. It was a hostile, assessing stare. As he watched, the rider turned his horse and melted back into the trees. That evening, Take returned. He appeared as he always did, without sound, a shadow detaching itself from the dusk. He was not due back for another week. "Your work is not finished," Nate said, surprised. "The passes are bad," Take said, dismounting, but his eyes were not on Nate. They were on the ridge. "You have watchers." "I saw one," Nate said, his gut tightening. "Two," Take corrected. "Their horses are shod for hard travel, not this valley. They left tracks." He walked to the pump, took the dipper, and drank. He looked at the cabin, where a thin curl of smoke was now rising. Linda was still inside, finishing her work. "A name," Take said, wiping his mouth. "Raymond. He is in town. He talks loud." "I heard," Nate said. "He talks about property," Take said, his voice flat and cold. "He talks about a woman. He talks about children. He says they belong to him." Take looked at Nate, his dark eyes sharp. "You have brought a storm to your valley, my friend. This one is not made of wind." Nate said nothing. The pieces were all there, sharp and ugly. The hunger, the pride, the boy, the eggs, the man named Raymond, the watchers on his ridge. That night, sleep was impossible. He sat in his chair, a rifle across his knees, and watched the snow. He was no longer just a man fixing a barn. He was a man on a perimeter. He was a man with a target on his land. The next day, he watched Linda work. She was mending a fence, her movements as steady and precise as ever, his gloves on her hands, but he saw it. Every few minutes, she would stop. She would stand still, her head tilted, and she would look, not at the town, but east, toward the dense, dark line of forest at the edge of his property. Her gaze was long and full of a deep, terrible ache. She was listening. She was watching. At dusk, she put her tools away. She pulled her gray cloak on, the hood shadowing her face. She did not walk toward the town road. She walked east, toward the forest. Nate pulled on his own coat, his steps silent in the snow. He kept 100 yards behind her. The no questions asked agreement was dead. It had been killed by a basket of eggs. And the threat of a man who saw children as property, he would know. He did not try to be a shadow. He was a rancher on his own land, and he walked, but he kept his distance, using the fading light and the long blue shadows of the pines as cover. The snow was deeper here, unbroken. She left a single, clear trail, moving with that same relentless, ground-covering pace she used for her work. She did not head for the road. She did not head for the town. She cut east, into the thick national forest timber that bordered his land, a place where the trees grew so close the snow lay thin on a bed of damp, brown needles. He followed. The air grew colder as the last light fled, and the silence of the forest was absolute, broken only by the soft crunch of his boots on the crust of the snow, a sound he timed to match her own distant footsteps. He was a good tracker. Take had taught him, but he did not need to track. He just had to follow the scent. It was faint at first, then stronger damp smoke, not the clean, sharp smell of seasoned oak burning hot, but the acrid, wet smell of green wood and damp leaves. A fire that struggled and smoked. It was the smell of poverty. He followed it for another quarter-mile, deeper into the trees, to a small, forgotten clearing where a creek ran, now frozen solid, and he saw it. It was not a cabin. It was a shack. It leaned against a massive pine as if for support, cobbled together from rotted timber, scavenged boards, and pieces of tin. The roof sagged. The single window was a patchwork of oiled paper and a piece of broken glass. The chimney was a length of rusted stovepipe, crooked and leaking that thin, gray, desperate smoke. He stopped. This was it. This was the place she had. He watched her. She did not pause at the door. She pushed it open, it scraped on the frozen ground and slipped inside. The door closed, and she was gone. He stood in the cover of the trees for a full 5 minutes, the cold seeping into his boots. The house he had just left was a fortress of stone and wood, with roaring fires and 3 hearths. He looked at the shack, which seemed like one hard wind would flatten it. He moved closer, silent as Taka had taught him, moving like a hunter. He did not know what he was looking for. He just knew he had to see. He came around the side, avoiding the lit window. He found a place where the chinking, a mix of mud and straw, had fallen out from between 2 warped logs. It was a crack, no bigger than his hand. He put his eye to it. The light inside was dim, coming from a single kerosene lamp on a rough table. The room was small, the dirt floor covered in places with worn blankets. A small, pot-bellied stove in the corner glowed a dull red, the source of the smoke, and the room was full. It was full of children. He saw the boy who had brought him the eggs. He was sitting on the floor, whittling a stick with a small knife. Another boy, slightly younger, was asleep on a pile of blankets near the stove. A girl, older, maybe 11 or 12, with Linda's same serious eyes, was stirring something in a pot on the stove. And on a straw mattress in the corner, a tiny, round-faced child, barely a toddler, was sitting up, chewing on a piece of wood. 4 children. Linda was at the center of the room, her gray cloak still on. The toddler, a little girl, saw her and her face lit up. "Mama?" she lisped, holding up her arms. Linda's face, the one he had only ever seen as a mask of hard control, broke. It dissolved into a tenderness so profound it was like a physical blow. She went to the toddler and scooped her up, burying her face in the child's tangled hair. "Hello, Ruth," she whispered, her voice a sound he had never heard, soft and aching. "Did you miss me?" The older girl, Nala, turned from the stove. "She was fine. Ma, Leo was mean to Tom again." The boy with the knife, Leo, looked up. "Was not. He took my stick." "Did not," a sleepy voice mumbled from the blankets. "Enough," Linda said, her voice tired but firm, the mask returning. She set Ruth down. "I have something." She reached into the pocket of her dress, the one she wore under the oversized man's coat. She pulled out the small tin, the one he had seen. She opened it. Inside was half a slice of bread, the half she had not eaten at noon. She took it out. She took the small knife Leo was using, wiped it on her skirt, and began to cut. She cut the half piece of bread into 4, impossibly small squares. She gave one to Nal, one to Leo, and one to the now awake Tom. She woke Ruth and gave her the last, tiny crust, which the child gummed happily. They ate it like it was cake. Nate's breath caught in his throat. His chest felt as if a band of iron was tightening around it. He remembered the plate of beef he had offered her. The plate she had refused. She had refused it so she could bring this tiny scrap to her children. "There is a leak, Ma," Nala said, her voice low, nodding up. "The blanket is wet again." Nate looked where she pointed. In the corner, a steady drip, drip, drip of melted snow was falling from the ceiling. A threadbare blanket on one of the cots was dark and soaked. Linda looked at it, and he saw a flicker of her exhaustion, the deep, bone-marrow weariness. "I will move the cot," she said. "Now, let me see about that soup." Nate pulled back from the wall. He stumbled away, his heart hammering against his ribs, a sick, cold feeling in his stomach. He backed into the trees, his mind reeling. 4 children. She was feeding 4 children, on one woman's day wage, in a shack that was leaking, in the middle of a Montana winter. He turned and walked, as silently as he could, back through the forest. He did not run, he did not look back. He respected the boundary. He had seen what he was not supposed to see, and the knowledge was a physical weight. By the time he reached his own land, his own massive, empty, silent house, he was shaking. Not from the cold. He was shaking with a cold, pure rage. He did not know who it was for the man Raymond, who had put this fear in her for the world that allowed it, for his own stupid, blind pride, which had been insulted when she refused his food. He went inside. The mahogany gleamed. The fire was roaring. The table was set for one. The silence of the house was deafening. He thought of the sound of the children, the tiny, muffled laughter, the bickering. His house was not silent. It was dead. He stood at the window and looked toward the forest. "How do they live like this?" he said, the words torn out of him, a harsh whisper in the grand, empty room. The next morning, he was in the barn before her. He heard her footsteps, the familiar sound. She went to the cabin, left her cloak, and came to the barn, his gloves already on her hands. She stopped. He was working. He was fixing the large barn door, the one that always stuck. He was planting the wood where it had swelled. "Good morning, Mr. Callahan," she said, her voice flat, as always. "Miss Rock," he grunted, not looking up from his work. He kept the plane moving, steady strokes. She watched him for a second, then went to her own task, mucking the stalls. The air was thick with a new, unspoken tension. He did not ask her where she went. He did not mention the children. He did not offer her food. He just worked. He worked with a fury, all of the energy, all the rage from the night before, channeled into the simple, physical labor. He planed the door. He took the new hinges he had bought and mounted them, his movements precise. He fixed the sticking latch. When he was done, he moved to the calving shed. He found a rotten section of wall, the same shed where Jet had been injured. He took a crowbar and ripped the boards out, the sound of it violent in the morning air. He found new timber and began to saw, his muscles bunching and screaming with the effort. He told himself it was work that needed doing. He told himself it was to make the place sound, to protect his animals. But as he hammered the new boards in, his blows hard and regular, he knew he was lying. He was fixing things. He was fixing his things, but he was doing it because he could not fix the leaking roof in the forest. He was repairing his own property, but he was thinking of hers. He was making the place she worked less cold, less broken, because he could not bear the thought of the place she lived. Take found him there, his face streaked with sweat despite the cold. Take did not say hello. He just sat on a bale of hay and watched Nate work for 5 minutes. Finally, Nate stopped, breathing hard. "The barn door is fixed," Take observed, his voice mild. "It was sticking," Nate said, wiping his face. "It has been sticking for 2 years." Take said. He looked at Nate, his gaze knowing. "You have the look of a man who has seen a ghost." Nate threw the hammer down. "I followed her." Take nodded slowly. 4 children. Taka, in a shack in the woods, a leaking roof and half a piece of bread for their supper. Take was silent. He looked at the new boards Nate had hammered into the wall. "She is a strong woman," he said. "To carry that and to work, that is a warrior's spirit." "It is not a spirit," Nate snapped. "It is desperation. They will not survive the winter in that place. I have to do something." "What will you do?" Take asked, his voice quiet, cutting. "Give her money. She will throw it in your face. Offer her your house. She will run, and you will never see her again. She is not your horse. Nate, you cannot put a rope on her and lead her to a warm stall just because you wish it." "So I do nothing," Nate demanded. "I let them freeze." "You are a rich man," Take said, standing. "You think you fix things by buying or by ordering. You cannot buy her, and you cannot order her. Her pride is the only thing she has left. It is her food and her fire. If you take that from her, you kill her faster than the cold." "Then what do I do?" Nate asked, his voice raw. You let her work, Take said. You let her earn, and you find a way to help that does not look like help. He gestured at the wall. This is good. You fix your house. You fix your barn. You make the place she earns her money a good place. You respect her work. That is all you can do. For now. Take put a hand on Nate's shoulder. The Apsaluk have many families. Some are of the blood. Some are chosen by the heart. But no family is built by stealing another's dignity. Take left, and Nate was alone with the smell of sawdust and his own frustration. That afternoon, the boy returned. Leo. Nate was in the yard. His fury cooled to a low, aching sadness. The boy approached, his face set in that same serious mask, and he held out the basket. 6 more eggs. Nate took the basket. He looked at the boy, this small, thin child who was the man of his tiny, hidden family. This is good payment, Leo, Nate said, his voice rough. The boy just nodded. He was about to turn and run, as always. Wait, Nate said. He went into his house, to his desk. He found a piece of paper. He wrote on it, the same clear, strong hand. He came back out. He folded the paper and handed it to the boy. Give this to your ma. The boy looked at it, confused. It is not payment, Nate said. It is a note. Leo took the paper, his small hand closing around it. He turned and ran, his coat flapping. Nate watched him go. The note was simple. He had not offered money. He had not offered charity. On the paper, he had written, no payment needed. Just thank you. Thank you for teaching me how to share. That evening, as the sun went down, Linda came to him. She was holding the piece of paper in her gloved hand. She stood in front of him, her face in the shadow of her hood, and for a long time, she said nothing. He did not speak either. He just waited. When she finally looked up, her eyes met his, and for the first time, he did not see fear or exhaustion or defiance. He saw a flicker of something else, a fragile, wounded, profound understanding. She knew that he knew. She did not say thank you. She did not cry. She just held his gaze for a second longer. Then she nodded, a single small dip of her chin. She turned, and without another word, she walked away, her small figure moving across the snow, disappearing into the woods, back to her children. But she left before the sun was fully gone. The light was still on the snow. The silence that settled between them was different. It was not the empty void of strangers. It was the dense, weighted silence of a shared secret. Nate knew, and Linda knew that he knew. She still arrived before dawn and left at dusk, but the wall of her pride, while still standing, now had a door. She did not flinch when he worked near her. She accepted the heavy pair of his leather gloves as her own, and her hands, though still scarred, began to heal. He did not offer food. He did not ask questions. He fixed his own property, channeling his restless, protective energy into the work. He reshod the horses. He rebuilt the paddock fence. He worked alongside her, their silence punctuated by the ring of his hammer and the scrape of her shovel. Take watched it all. He sat on the porch, his own work in the high passes delayed, and observed the new rhythm of the ranch. He watched Nate, who now seemed to be patrolling his own land, his eyes constantly scanning the ridgeline, and he watched the sky. It is holding its breath, Take said one morning. Nate was splitting logs, the axe falling with a sharp, clean sound. Nate paused, wiping the sweat from his forehead. What is... The sky. Take pointed north with his chin. The air was unnaturally still. The smoke from the chimney rising in a perfectly straight line. The sky was a pale, flat white. The wind is coiled. It is waiting. This will be the one the grandfathers tell stories about. Nate looked north. He felt it too. A pressure in the air. When? 2 days, maybe 3. Take stood, pulling his blanket coat tight. I am going north, to the passes. My people may be caught high. I must warn them. You will be riding straight into it, Nate said. It is the way, Take said simply. He put his hand on his horse's mane. He paused and looked at Nate, his gaze sharp. I left something for you, in the barn. He pulled a small, carved piece of bone from a pouch at his neck. It was hollowed, with a leather thong. A whistle. No, that is for my brother. What I left for you is in the barn. Nate found it later. Hanging on the wall was a long, tightly coiled bull whip, a weapon he had never seen Take carry. It was not a tool. It was a weapon, a message. If I am not back when the snow flies, Take said, his voice low, listen, if you hear the cry of a mountain eagle, but it is night, it is not an eagle. He touched the bone whistle at his neck. It means the passes are closed. It means the valley is next. It is a signal for my people. If you hear it, get to your stone house and bar the door. Nate nodded. Safe travels, my friend. Take swung onto his horse in one fluid motion. He looked once more at the ranch, at the small cabin where Linda was cleaning, and then at Nate. You are building good fences, Nate Callahan. Make sure you know what you are fencing in and what you are fencing out. He turned his horse and was gone, a lean shadow disappearing against the white snow. The next day, the pressure built. The horses were skittish, pacing their stalls. Jet was the worst, kicking the wood, his ears pinned. Linda felt it too. She was working near the chicken coop, reinforcing the small structure, when a sudden, violent gust of wind came out of the still sky. It hit the ranch with a shriek, rattling the windows of the big house and tearing a loose shutter from the barn. Linda cried out, a small, sharp sound, and dropped the hammer. She spun around, her hand flying to her throat, her eyes fixed on the eastern forest. Her face, usually so controlled, was a mask of stark terror. Nate was coming from the barn. It is just wind, Miss Rock, he said, his voice steady. It will pass. She was trembling, her eyes wide. No, she whispered, not to him, but to herself. Not yet, not yet. She seemed to catch herself, to remember where she was. We must be ready. She stopped. The word hung in the cold. Charged air. It was the first time, the first acknowledgement of the lives she lived in the woods. It was a crack in the wall, forced open by the wind and her fear. Nate felt his chest tighten. He did not acknowledge her slip. He just nodded, his gaze serious. The sky looks bad. Take said it would be, you should stay in the hired cabin today. It is closer. It is safe. The stove is hot. She looked at him, her panic fading, the old, stubborn pride reasserting itself, but it was weaker now. Thank you, but I cannot, I have to get back. Linda, he said, her name a quiet shock in the air. He had never used it. She flinched, but she held his gaze. You will not make it back to that shack if the storm hits true, he said, his voice low. Her eyes filled with a new, different kind of fear. Not of him. How do you... I know, he said, cutting her off. I have known... She looked as if he had struck her. She took a step back, her face pale. You followed me. It was an accusation. I did, he said. I am not ashamed of it. I will not be either. 4 children, in that place. This wind will tear it to pieces. It is my home, she said, her voice a low, fierce whisper. It is ours. You had no right. And what will you do when the wind takes the roof? He demanded, his own control slipping, the frustration and fear of weeks boiling over. What will your pride do for them then, when they are freezing? They are my children, she cried, her voice breaking. My responsibility. And now you have made them mine, he roared, the words torn from him. as wild as the wind. They stared at each other, the truth finally bare between them, raw and ugly. The sound of a horse, a slow, deliberate walk, made them both turn. He was sitting on a fine black gelding at the edge of the property, just where the wagon road met Nate's private land. He was not one of the drifters from the ridge. This man was dressed in a long, dark wool coat, with a pearl gray hat. He was handsome, in a way that had gone soft and cruel. A small, well-trimmed mustache, a faint smile on his lips. Linda made a sound, a low, guttural noise of pure dread, and she staggered back, one hand grabbing the wall of the coop to hold herself up. The man saw her. His smile widened. "Well, now," he said. His voice was smooth, educated, and it carried on the heavy, strange air. "Linda, my sweet, I had a feeling I would find you here, hiding among the high and mighty." Nate stepped forward, placing his body between Linda and the rider. "This is private property," he said, his voice a low growl. "State your business." The man's eyes, a pale, cold blue, slid from Linda to Nate. He looked him up and down, taking in the size of the man, the solid house behind him, the vast, wealthy ranch. "Mr. Callahan, I presume," the man said, tipping his hat with a mocking flourish. "The millionaire hermit, I am Raymond." He made a small bow in the saddle. "My business, sir, is a domestic one, a private matter. It concerns that woman." He nodded at Linda, who was pressed against the wall as if she wanted to disappear into the wood. "Her name is Miss Rock," Nate said, "and she is on my land, under my employ, which means her business is my business." Raymond laughed, a soft, unpleasant sound. "Oh, I am sure it is. She always did have a knack for finding protection." He swung his leg, dismounting slowly. He was not armed, or at least not visibly. He was all smooth confidence. "You see, sir, she has something of mine." "She has nothing," Linda whispered, her voice shaking. "I have nothing of yours." "Oh, but you do, my love," Raymond said, taking a step onto Nate's land. He ran a hand along the new white fence. "You have my children, my legal, biological children, and the law. Mr. Callahan, the law is a beautiful thing. It says that property must be returned to its rightful owner." Nate felt the blood drain from his face. This was the man, the one who saw children as livestock. "They are not your property," Nate said, his voice dangerously quiet. "They are, legally speaking," Raymond said, dusting a piece of snow from his sleeve. "A technicality you will come to appreciate. I have the papers. The judge in Helena is an old friend of my father's. So, I will ask you once kindly. Tell her to go and fetch them." You cannot," Linda choked out. You left us with nothing." "I was on a business trip, my dear," Raymond said, his tone one of mock sadness. "And you fled. You stole my flesh and blood, and now I am here to take them back." His eyes hardened, the smooth facade cracking. "They are worth a considerable amount, to me, as my heirs." "Get off my land," Nate said. Raymond looked at him, surprised. "I am trying to be civil. Callahan, this does not concern you. You are threatening a person under my protection. You are on my property. That concerns me." Nate took a step forward. He was a good 4 inches taller than Raymond, and solid muscle from years of ranch work. The bullwhip Take had left was coiled in the barn, but Nate did not need it. Raymond held up his hands, that slick smile returning. "No violence. I am a man of the law. I just wanted to deliver the message." He looked past Nate, at Linda. "I will be back, Linda, with the sheriff. With a court order, you cannot hide them forever. You cannot work your charms on every rich man in the territory." He climbed back onto his horse, his movements easy. "A storm is coming. Callahan, You would be wise to get your own house in order. You do not want to be involved in this." He tipped his hat again, turned his horse, and rode away at a calm, unhurried walk. They stood in the roaring silence, the wind gusting, the sky growing darker by the minute. Jed and Martha, his neighbors, rode by on the main road, their wagon loaded high with supplies. They stopped. They had seen Raymond ride away. They looked at Nate, and they looked at Linda, who was now weeping silently against the wall. Martha pointed, her face a mask of judgment. Jed just shook his head and slapped the reins, urging his team on. The gossip was already flying. Linda pushed herself off the wall. She was not weeping. Her face was a mask of cold, hard terror. She grabbed her cloak and began to run. Not toward the road. She ran east, toward the forest, toward the shack, toward her children. Nate watched her go, stumbling in the snow, her gray cloak flying behind her. He let her go. He turned and went into his house, the fortress. He was a man of logic. He was a man of control. He was a man who hated chaos. And chaos had just ridden onto his land and threatened his peace. He went to the pantry. He pulled down a burlap sack. He filled it. Tinned milk, a slab of bacon, a bag of flour, coffee. He went to his linen closet and pulled out 5 of his thickest wool blankets. He found 2 of his own old oilcloth slickers. He put it all in a pile by the back door, the one that faced the forest. He stood at the window and watched the storm. The wind was no longer gusting. It was a solid, screaming wall of sound. The sky was black. It was 3 in the afternoon, and it was as dark as midnight. Snow was no longer falling. It was moving horizontally, like a river of ice. He thought of the shack. He thought of that leaning, rotten stovepipe. He thought of the leaking roof. He thought of Nal and Leo and Tom and the little one, Ruth. He heard Take's voice in his head. "You cannot steal her dignity." He paced the length of his great room, from the cold fireplace to the dead library. He was torn. If he went now, he was Raymond. He was the rich man, imposing his will, taking what he wanted. He would be proving Raymond right. He would be destroying the last thing she had. The house groaned, a sound so deep it seemed to come from the earth itself, a sound of timbers under unbearable stress. His house, his fortress of stone and mahogany, it was groaning. He stopped pacing. He looked at the pile of blankets. He thought of the leaking roof. He thought of the blanket Nala had been trying to mend. He pictured Ruth, coughing in the damp. He made the decision. His jaw set. Dignity was a luxury for warm days. This was not a warm day. Take was his friend, but Take was not a father. Take did not understand, or perhaps he understood too well, and this was the test. He would not go now. He would give her that much. He would let her fight this first assault on her own. But he put on his heaviest coat, the one lined with sheepskin. He pulled his hat low, and he made a vow to the screaming wind. If that wind broke that shack, if that roof gave way, he was going into that forest, and he was bringing them all back. Whether Linda Rock agreed to it or not, the children came first. Their safety was the only law he would obey tonight. He opened the back door, and the wind tried to tear it from his hands. He leaned his shoulder into it, a small, solid man against a world of white fury, and he watched the forest, and he waited. The night did not just fall, it exploded. The wind, which had been a steady, screaming wall, changed. It began to hurl things, sleet, then ice, then hail. It was not a blizzard. It was an assault. The sound was no longer a howl. It was a physical roar, a low, guttural noise of something breaking. Nate stood in his barn, the wind finding its way through the new boards he had just nailed, the air so cold it burned his lungs. He had brought all the horses into the main barn, crowding them together for warmth. Jet was screaming. The stallion was kicking the walls of his reinforced stall, his eyes white with terror, the sound of the ice, like thousands of hammers on the roof, was driving him mad. He was rearing, striking the wood, a sound of such panic that it cut through the storm. Nate tried to calm him, his hand on the horse's neck, his voice low. "Easy, boy, easy, it is just ice." But Jet slammed his body against the door, the hinges groaning, and in that moment, Nate knew. If his barn, his solid, overbuilt barn, was groaning, what was happening in the forest? What was happening to that shack, cobbled together from rot and tin? He did not think. He did not weigh the options. The decision was made. He left the stallion, who continued to scream, and ran from the barn. He fought the wind to his house, the ice stinging his face like needles. He grabbed the burlap sack he had packed, the one with the tinned milk and flour, and threw it over his shoulder. He grabbed the pile of wool blankets. He did not bother with the slickers. There was no time. He plunged into the storm, heading east. It was not walking. It was a fight for every foot. The wind tore the breath from his lungs. The ice, driven by a wind of 50, maybe 60 miles an hour, hit his face, and he could feel the skin breaking, the warm trickle of his own blood freezing instantly on his cheek. He kept his head down, his hat pulled so low it covered his eyes. He did not need to see. He knew the way. He had walked it in his mind 100 times. He moved from the shelter of his barn into the open field, and the storm hit him like a train. It knocked him to his knees. The sack and blankets were torn from his grasp. He roared, a curse that was ripped from his throat and stolen by the wind. He would not be beaten. He crawled on his hands and knees, the ice piling up against his back. Found the sack, found the blankets. He got to his feet, a man leaning at an impossible angle, a small, dark shape fighting a white, screaming world. He reached the forest. He thought it would be better. It was worse. The trees were not shelter. They were weapons. The wind was in their tops, a sound so loud it was beyond hearing, a pressure in his skull, and the trees were breaking. He heard the sharp rifle crack of timber, the groan and crash of massive limbs falling in the dark. He was walking through an artillery barrage. "Linda!" he shouted. The wind mocked him, throwing the name back in his face. He smelled the smoke before he saw the shack. The same desperate, wet smoke. He burst into the clearing. The shack was still standing, but it was shaking, a living thing in the grip of a monster. The entire structure was leaning, the great pine it rested against groaning. The tin roof was peeling back, one section flapping and screaming, a high metallic shriek that was worse than the wind. He did not knock. He threw his shoulder against the door. It was barred. "Linda!" he roared, slamming his fist against the wood. "Open the door, it is Nate. It is Callahan." He heard a shriek from inside. A child. He did not wait. He stepped back, braced himself, and kicked. He kicked with all the strength of a man who kicked down frozen fences. The wood around the latch splintered. The bar inside snapped. The door flew open, torn from its broken hinges, and was ripped away by the wind, disappearing into the white vortex. He stumbled inside, the sack and blankets falling to the floor. The scene was from a nightmare. The wind was in the cabin, a swirling, snow-filled cyclone. The lamp was out, the room lit only by the dull, dying red of the pot-bellied stove, which had been knocked sideways. Smoke filled the air. Linda was in the center of the room. She was holding Ruth in her arms. Nal was next to her, her arms around Tom, and Leo, the boy, was standing with his small legs braced, his back to the wall, a look of pure, adult terror on his face. They were all soaked. The roof was not leaking. It was gone. A whole section was missing, and the wind and snow were pouring in. A dark, wet stain was spreading across the one remaining cot. Linda looked at him. Her face was white, her eyes black holes. She was not the woman who had defied him. She was not the woman of pride. She was an animal, trapped, shielding her young. "Ma!" Nala screamed. "The roof!" Nate looked up. He heard it, a sound he knew from the calving shed, a long, groaning, splitting sound. A main rafter, the one holding what was left of the roof, was cracking. A dark line was moving down the center of the wood, widening. He did not speak. He did not ask. He moved. He lunged forward and grabbed Ruth from Linda's arms. The child was icy cold, her small body trembling. He tucked her inside his own heavy sheepskin coat, against his chest, her small face against his heart. He grabbed Nal by the arm. "Leo, Tom!" he yelled, his voice a command. "Now we go now!" He turned, pushing Nala, who was still clutching Tom, toward the empty doorway. Leo did not move. He was frozen, his eyes on the cracking beam. "Linda!" Nate yelled. She was just standing there, her arms empty, her face vacant with shock. "The roof is coming down," he roared. "Move!" The sound of his voice, the pure animal command, broke her trance. She looked at the roof. She saw the splintering wood. She saw Leo, frozen. She lunged, grabbed Leo, and half dragged, half threw him toward the door. "Go!" she screamed. "Go to the light!" There was no light. There was only the white, screaming darkness of the storm. Ensate shoved Nala and Tom out into the blizzard. Linda pushed Leo out after them. Nate turned back. The roof was giving way. "Linda!" She was the last. She looked back. One last, agonizing look at the place that had been her home, her fortress. Then she looked at him. It was not a look of surrender. It was not gratitude. It was a look of pure, desperate partnership. A look that said, "Save them." She dove out into the storm. Nate was right behind her, his body shielding the small lump of Ruth inside his coat. They were not a second too soon. As he cleared the threshold, the entire structure collapsed behind them. A roar of splitting wood, a cascade of snow and tin and rotted timber. The stove was buried. The cots were crushed. If they had been inside, they would be dead. They stood in the clearing, the wind trying to tear them apart. There was no house. There was only the storm. "Nala!" Linda shrieked, her voice thin. "Where is Nala?" "Here, Ma," a small, terrified voice answered. Nate found them, a small, huddling mass of bodies. "We have to move," he yelled, his voice already raw. "We have to move or we die. Head for my house, head for the light." There was no light. "Linda, take Tom," he commanded. "Nah, you hold your brother's hand. Leo, you hold on to Nala. Do you understand me? You do not let go." "Yes, sir," a small, shaking voice answered. "Leo, I will lead." Nate said, "I have Ruth. Follow me. Do not stop." He turned and pushed his way back into the forest, back into the hell of the storm. It was worse. The snow was deeper now, drifting over his knees. He was breaking a trail, and every step was agony. He could feel the small, cold body of Ruth against his chest, her shallow, trembling breaths. "Keep moving," he yelled, though he could not hear himself. He did not look back. He could not. If he looked back, if he stopped, they would all die. He heard Linda behind him, her breath a raw, sobbing gasp. He heard one of the children fall, a thin wail. He heard Linda curse, a foul, sharp word, as she hauled the child up. They moved like animals, a small, broken herd fleeing a predator. They lurching, falling, crawling. The mud and snow and ice were a frozen river. Nate's legs were lead. His lungs were on fire, but the small, cold weight against his heart kept him going. He stumbled out of the forest, into the open field. The wind hit them. It was a solid wall of ice. It knocked them all flat. "No!" Nate roared, forcing himself up. He was a rock in the middle of a frozen, raging sea. He found Nala, hauled her to her feet. "Get up." Linda was on her hands and knees, Tom on her back. "I cannot," she gasped, her voice broken. "Leo, his boot." Leo was sitting in the snow, his face white, one of his boots gone, his foot wrapped in a thin, wet sock. Nate did not hesitate. He ripped the burlap sack from his back. The food, the flour, it scattered, stolen by the wind. He grabbed the wool blankets, half frozen, and shoved one at Linda. "Wrap his foot," he commanded. "We are almost there." He could not see his house. He could not see 10 feet in front of him, but he knew where it was. He put Nal's hand on his own belt. "Hold on," he said. "Nala, you hold on to me. Leo, you hold on to your sister. Linda, you are behind me. We go." He moved, dragging them. He was a steam engine, a force of pure, stubborn will. He was not a millionaire. He was not a hermit. He was a man with 4 children, pulling them from the dark. He hit the wall of the barn, solid wood. He had never felt anything so beautiful. "Here," he yelled, "the house." He fumbled his way along the wall, found the path, and then the steps to his own back door. He threw his shoulder against it. It opened. He fell inside, into the kitchen. He fell onto the floor, a tangle of bodies and snow and wool. He was in his house. He was in the warmth. He was in the light. He rolled over, gasping, pulling the sheepskin coat open. Ruth was pale, her eyes closed, but she was breathing. The other 3 children were in a heap, soaked, frozen, but alive. Linda lay on the floor, her body heaving. She was not crying, she was just breathing. Nate got to his feet. He was moving on pure instinct. "Fire," he said, his voice a croak. "We need fire." He went to the great room, to the massive stone fireplace. He piled it high with dry wood, and in minutes, a roaring, raging fire was leaping up the chimney, throwing heat and light into the room. "Get them in here," he said. He helped Linda, who was so cold she could barely stand. They half carried, half dragged the children. He stripped the wet, frozen clothes from them, his hands, clumsy and large, fumbling with the small buttons. He did not care about modesty. He cared about life. He wrapped each of them in the dry, heavy wool blankets from his linen closet. He sat them in a row in front of the fire. Nal, Tom, Leo, and little Ruth. They sat there, 4 small, stunned birds, their hair steaming, their faces pale. He went to the kitchen. He came back with the tinned milk and a bottle of his own whiskey. He poured the milk into a pot, added a dash of water, and held it over the fire until it was steaming. He poured 4 mugs, and 1 for Linda. He added a small drop of whiskey to hers. "Drink," he said. He handed the mugs to the children. Their hands were shaking too hard to hold them. Nal, the oldest, took hers. Her eyes, those same serious purple eyes, looking at him over the rim. He held the mug for little Ruth, and she drank, the warm milk running down her chin. Linda sat on the floor, a few feet from him, wrapped in a blanket of her own. She was watching the children, her eyes moving from one face to the next, counting them, making sure they were real. The children's breathing, which had been ragged and shallow, began to deepen. Their eyes grew heavy, one by one. They curled up on the rug, cocooned in their wool blankets, and fell asleep in the radiating warmth of the fire. The only sound in the room was the roar of the fire and the scream of the wind outside, a sound that could no longer hurt them. Nate sat on the hearth, the exhaustion hitting him like a physical blow. He felt beaten, bruised, but he was not cold. Linda was sitting on the floor, her back against a heavy chair. She had not drunk her milk. She was just staring into the flames, her face strained. "They are asleep," Nate said, his voice low. She nodded. Her hands were clasped in her lap, so tight her knuckles were white. He got up. He went to the kitchen and came back with a warm, wet cloth. He knelt in front of her. He did not ask. He just took her hand. It was raw. bleeding from the journey, caked with ice and mud. Gently, his large, rough hands washed hers. He washed the mud from her skin, the blood from her broken knuckles. She did not pull away. She just let him, her body trembling. He finished one hand and started on the other. His hand, holding the cloth, brushed against hers. It was not a caress. It was a simple, human touch. Skin on skin, warmth on cold. He felt a jolt, a spark of heat that had nothing to do with the fire. It was the shock of life, of contact, after years of holding himself apart. He finished. He tossed the cloth into a basin. He sat back on the hearth. They sat in silence for a long time. "Tomorrow," she whispered, her voice so low he barely heard it. "We will leave tomorrow morning." Nate looked at her. He looked at the 4 small bodies sleeping in front of his fire. He looked at the ice that was forming on the inside of his own. Good. Thick windows. He turned back to her. "No," he said, his voice quiet, but absolute. "Not while that roof is still leaking." She looked at him, her eyes finally, fully meeting his in the firelight. "You will stay," he said. It was not a question. It was not an order. It was a fact. It was the only fact in a world that had just been torn apart and rebuilt. He got up and put another log on the fire, the heavy wood settling, sparks flying up the chimney. He would not sleep. He would watch the fire. He would watch them. Linda pulled her knees to her chest. She did not argue. She did not thank him. She closed her eyes, just for a moment, and for the first time in a long time. She was not alone. She was not the only one standing guard. She closed her eyes, and in the heat of the fire, she let herself, finally, just for a minute, rest. The morning broke with a silence that was louder than the storm. The wind was gone. The world outside Nate Callahan's windows was a new, alien landscape, buried under 6 feet of white. The sky was a pale, bruised blue, and the sun, when it rose, cast an impossibly bright, cold light on a world that had been broken and scoured clean. Inside the house, the fire still roared. Nate had not slept. He had sat in the chair, watching the 4 children breathe in the warmth of his hearth. They woke one by one, disoriented. Nal, the oldest, sat up first, her eyes wide with confusion, seeing the high beamed ceiling, the stone fireplace, the rich mahogany. She saw Nate, his face grim with exhaustion, and she pulled the blanket tighter, her hand moving to find her siblings. Linda was stiff, her body aching from the cold and the journey. She had dozed in the chair, her pride warring with her exhaustion. She stood and went to her children, her hands checking them, touching their faces, reassuring herself they were real, they were warm. "Ma'am?" Leo's voice was small. "Are we in heaven?" "No, son." Nate's rough voice cut in. He was at the kitchen stove. "This is Montana, and you are in my house." He did not look at them. He was cracking eggs into a large cast-iron skillet, the eggs the boy had brought him. The irony was not lost on him. "Breakfast will be ready in 5 minutes. There is water in the basin. Wash your faces." The children, used to obeying, looked at their mother. Linda was frozen. A guest, a refugee. This was not her home. This was not her food, but her children were hungry. She gave a single, stiff nod. They ate at the massive dining table, the 4 children and Linda on one side, Nate at the head. They ate bacon and eggs and biscuits Nate had made from the flour she had once rejected. The children ate with a desperate, silent hunger. Linda ate almost nothing, her hands clasped in her lap, her body coiled like a spring. She was waiting for the other boot to drop. The day passed in a strange, dreamlike truce. The storm had sealed them in. The snow was too deep to travel. Nate went out to check his horses, who were stressed but alive. He dug his way to the barn, the work immense, the snow a solid wall. Linda dressed the children in ill-fitting, Old clothes of his she had found, dried by the fire. She sent them to the library, where, in stunned silence, they discovered books. Nal began to read aloud to them, her voice a small, steady thread in the vast, quiet house. Linda found a broom. She began to sweep. She swept the kitchen, the great room, the hall. She was not a guest. She was working. It was the only way she knew how to exist. Nate came in from the barn, his face raw from the cold, and found her on her knees, scrubbing a spot on the floor. "Miss Rock," he said, his voice hard. "Leave it." "I do not take charity, Mr. Callahan," she said, not looking up. "This is not charity," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "This is survival. Stop, you are safe here. For now." She stopped scrubbing, but she did not get up. "He will come," she whispered. "Raymond, he will come." "Let him," Nate said, turning to hang his coat. "The snow has him blocked, same as us." But he was wrong. The snow was a barrier, but hate and greed were tools that cut through it. Late in the afternoon, when the sun was already beginning to drop, painting the new, deep snow in shades of pink and orange, Nate heard it. It was not the wind. It was the rhythmic, heavy sound of horses plunging through deep drifts. He went to the window. Linda was right behind him. 3 riders. They were coming up the main road, the one he had not cleared. They had forced their way, their horses steaming and heaving. At the lead was Raymond, his face a mask of black, frozen rage. With him were 2 men Nate recognized from the saloon. Hard cases, their faces blank and mean. "Inside," Nate said, his voice flat. "Get the children away from the window, now!" Linda's face went white. She did not argue. She ran to the library, her voice sharp. "Nal, boys. To the back room, play a game. Do not come out." Nate pulled his rifle from the rack by the door. He checked the load. He did not put on his coat. He opened the front door and stepped onto the porch, the rifle held loose in his hand, the muzzle pointing at the floor. The 3 riders stopped 20 feet from his porch. The snow was to their horses' bellies. "That is far enough," Nate called out. His voice was calm. "Callahan!" Raymond roared. He swung down from his horse, plunging into the snow up to his waist. He was beyond his smooth, legal threats. This was pure rage. "You stole her. You brought that whore into your house." "She is under my protection," Nate said. "You are on my land. I have asked you to leave. This is the last time I will ask." "Protection," Raymond laughed. A wild, unhinged sound. "She is my property, her. And the children, they belong to me. I have the papers." "The children are in that house," Linda's voice said, sharp and clear. She was standing in the doorway behind Nate, her face a pale, taut mask. "And you will not touch them." Raymond saw her, his face contorted. "You!" he snarled. "You think you are safe hiding behind this rich man's walls. I am taking them. Linda, I am taking my sons, and I am taking that girl for good measure." He started to walk forward, his hands clenched. "No," Nate said. He stepped in front of Linda, blocking the doorway with his body. He did not raise the rifle. "The children stay here." "Get out of my way, Callahan." Raymond spat. "This is not your fight." "You are on my porch," Nate said, his voice dangerously low. "You have made it my fight." Raymond looked at Nate, at his size, at the cold certainty in his eyes. Then he looked at the 2 men behind him. "He is one man," Raymond sneered. "Get him." It happened fast. Raymond lunged, not at Nate, but he shoved him, trying to get past him, into the house. Nate shoved back, hard, sending Raymond staggering into the snow. The 2 drifters, seeing their employer attacked, moved at the same time. One went low, tackling Nate around the knees. The other threw a punch, a looping, wild right hook. Nate saw it coming. He turned, and the punch grazed his temple. But the man at his knees brought him down. He fell, hard, onto the snow-covered porch. The rifle skittered away. Useless. He was on his back. One man was on his legs. The other was on his chest, his fists rising and falling. Nate was a rancher. He was strong. He blocked the first punch, his forearm jarring. He got his hand free and drove his fist into the man's side, a brutal gut shot that made the man gasp. But it was 2-on-1. Raymond was on his feet, his face bloody where he had hit the porch rail. "Hold him!" Raymond screamed. Nate was fighting, a silent, grim battle. He heaved, trying to throw the man off him. He got to one knee, and then Raymond's boot crashed into his side, a vicious, cowardly kick to the ribs. Nate gasped, the air driven from his lungs. He felt a sharp, white, hot pain. A rib, broken. He slumped, and the man on his chest hit him, a solid, cracking blow to the jaw. The world exploded in white stars. He was on his knees, his head hanging, spitting blood onto the snow. "Nate!" He heard Linda scream. It was a sound of pure terror. He looked up. Raymond, his face a mask of triumph and cruelty. He had grabbed her from the doorway. He had her arm twisted up behind her back, her face contorted in pain. "You see?" Raymond snarled, his face close to hers. "He cannot protect you. No one can. You are mine." The children were there, at the window, their small hands and faces pressed to the glass, their mouths open in silent screams. "You will sign the papers, Linda," Raymond was hissing. "You will give them to me, or I will break your arm, right here." He gave a sharp, cruel twist. Linda cried out, a sound of agony. Nate tried to stand. He pushed himself up, but his legs were weak. The two men were standing over him, laughing. "Not so tough now, are you, millionaire?" The sound was not a gunshot. It was a roar. A heavy-gauge shotgun, blasting into the cold, still air. Everything froze. The two drifters spun around, their hands flying up. Raymond let go of Linda, shoving her to the porch as he spun. Jed, Nate's neighbor, was standing not 30 yards away. He had come on snowshoes, his face grim, his old double-barreled shotgun leveled squarely at Raymond's chest. "That is," Jed said, his voice a calm, deadly drawl. "Quite enough of that. We heard the yelling." And then, from behind him, Martha appeared. She was breathing hard, her face red, her old Colt revolver held in two, shaking hands, but it was pointed. It was pointed right at Raymond. "You get off this land, Raymond," Martha said, her voice high and thin, but furious. "You are a plague on this valley. We are tired of you." Raymond looked at Jed. He looked at Martha. He looked at Nate, who was slowly, painfully, getting to his feet, his hand on the porch rail, blood dripping from his mouth. He looked at the two drifters, who were already backing away. He had lost. He knew it. This is not lawful," Raymond sputtered, trying to regain his dignity. "Lawful is in Helena." Jed said, "This is the valley, and you are not welcome. Go, now." Raymond looked at Linda, who was pulling herself up, her face white with pain and shock. He pointed a finger, his hands shaking with rage. "This is not over, you bitch. You hear me? I will see you in court. I will take them. I will take them all. And I will see you in a poorhouse." He turned, stumbled through the snow, and hauled himself onto his horse. His two hired men were already mounted. They rode off, back the way they came. A frantic, desperate retreat, leaving a trail of churned, bloody snow. The silence that fell was heavy, broken only by Nate's ragged breathing. Jed lowered his shotgun. Martha, her hands shaking so hard, nearly dropped the Colt. She put it in her apron pocket. Jed looked at Nate, then at Linda. He nodded once, a gesture of awkward, profound support. "Mr. Callahan, ma'am, looks like you have company." Martha's gaze was different now. The judgment was gone, replaced by a fierce, maternal pity. She looked at Linda and at the small, terrified faces in the window. You had best see to his face," she said, her voice surprisingly soft. That was a good thing he did." They turned and walked away. Two small, determined figures, their snowshoes leaving a wide, clear path. Nate sank onto the top step of the porch, his head in his hands. The pain in his ribs was a searing fire. Linda disappeared into the house. He heard her, her voice sharp. "Stay in the back. Do not come out. You are safe." She came back a moment later. She had a basin of warm water and a cloth. She knelt in the snow in front of him. Her hands were shaking. She dipped the cloth, her movements jerky. She reached out to touch the cut on his jaw. He flinched, the pain sharp. "I am sorry," she whispered. "My ribs," he gasped. "I think he broke one." "He twisted your arm," Nate said, his voice a rasp. "Did he—" "No," she said, her voice trembling. "It is just sore. Let me—" Her hand was so gentle. She dabbed at the blood on his mouth, her touch as light as a feather. Their faces were inches apart. He could see the fear still in her eyes, the purple, bruised color. But there was something else there, too, a heat. He was looking at her, not as an employer, not as a problem, but as a woman. And she was looking at him, not as a savior, not as a rich man, but as a man who was bleeding for her. "Why?" he whispered, his voice catching. "Why did he let you go before—" She stopped dabbing, her hand hovering. "What?" "Raymond. You said he left you. Why did he leave the children with you? Why not take them then?" She looked down, her face closing, the mask returning. Because they are not all his," she whispered, her voice so low it was almost lost. "Only Leo. The law says he is his son. Nala, Tom, Ruth, they are mine. From before, he did not care about them, until he thought he could sell them, or use them." The confession hung in the frozen air, an ugly, terrible secret. "Nate, he will not take them." "Linda, he will. He has papers. He has the law." "Then the law is wrong," Nate said, his voice a growl. He looked at her chapped, trembling hands. "If I had not been here, what would you have done?" She met his gaze. The fear was still there, but beneath it, the iron, the spine that had kept her alive. "I would have fought," she said. "I would have fought him, and if I could not, I would have run. And if I could not run, I do not know." He put his hand over hers, the one holding the cloth. His hand was bloody. Hers was cold. "You are not running," he said. "Not anymore." He looked up. The sun was gone. The sky was a deep, velvet purple, and the first stars were appearing. A shadow was detaching itself from the dusk. "Take." He was on his horse, which looked exhausted. He had come from the north. He stopped, his gaze taking in the scene, the tracks, the blood in the snow, Nate's battered face, Linda, kneeling. He dismounted. He looked at Nate. "The storm," Nate said, as if that explained it. "This was not the storm," Take said, his eyes on the tracks. "This was Raymond." "He brought men," Nate said, wincing as he tried to shift. "He will be back, with the law." Take looked at Linda, at the house. He heard, faintly, the sound of a child's voice. He nodded. "Helena, he will go to the white man's court." He came and stood in front of Nate. He looked at the blood. He looked at the determination. "My people trade in Helena," Take said, his voice quiet. "The men who wear robes, they know the absolute. They know we do not lie." He looked at Linda, a long, assessing gaze. I have seen this man. Raymond, I have seen his heart. It is black. I have seen the children. Their hearts are clean. He turned back to Nate. When you go, I will go. I will stand in your white man's house. I will speak. The courtroom in Helena was colder than the snow outside. It was a room of dark, hard wood, a high ceiling that trapped the heat far from the people, and a silence that was heavier than a winter blanket. It smelled of old paper, floor oil, and the faint, acidic scent of fear. Nate Callahan sat on a bench in the front row. He was not wearing his ranch clothes. He wore a black suit, one he had not worn in 3 years, and it felt like a coffin. His ribs still ached from Raymond's boot, a sharp, constant reminder. Beside him sat Linda Rock. She wore her one good dress, a dark wool that had been mended so many times the stitches formed their own pattern. Her hands were clasped in her lap, her knuckles white. She was staring at the judge's empty chair, her face pale, her eyes, those deep purple eyes, wide and hollow. Behind them, filling the bench, sat Taka. He was an impossible, vital presence in the sterile room. He wore his buckskins, his blanket coat, and his hair was loose. He did not look at the judge's chair. He looked at the men, his gaze missing nothing, his face a mask of calm, patient observation. He was there as a witness. He was there as a friend. On the other side of the aisle sat Raymond. He was dressed in a fine Eastern suit, his hair oiled, his mustache trimmed. The bruises from Nate's fist had faded. He looked confident, smiling as he whispered to his lawyer, a slick man with a pinstriped vest and a heavy gold watch chain. The children were not there. Nate had left them with Martha and Jed, a decision that had almost broken Linda, but he had been firm. This is not a place for them, he had said. They are safe. Martha has them baking. You will go and fight, and then we will go and bring them home. Now, watching the lawyer, Nate felt a cold knot in his stomach. This was not a fight of fists or storms. This was a fight of paper. And he knew, with a sinking certainty, that they were outgunned. The judge entered, a man with a gray face and tired eyes. He sat. The courtroom rustled and went silent. Raymond's lawyer stood. He was smooth. He was eloquent. He spoke of the sanctity of fatherhood. He spoke of a man's right, his God-given, legal right, to his own issue. He waved a piece of paper. We have here, Your Honor, a birth certificate. It states clearly that one Leo Rock, also known as Leo, well, just Leo, was born to one Linda Rock. The father, he paused, his voice dropping, is listed as my client, Mr. Raymond. He produced another paper, a marriage license. Mr. Raymond and Miss Rock were, in fact, husband and wife at the time of the child's conception and birth, though she has since strayed. He spoke of property. He spoke of lineage. He spoke of a father's natural love and a mother's wicked, unstable nature. He painted Linda as a vagrant, a drifter who had stolen the child, depriving him of his rightful inheritance and a stable, wealthy home. He did not mention the other children. They did not exist in the eyes of his case. The judge looked at the papers. He looked at Linda. Miss Rock, do you have a lawyer? Nate started to rise, but Linda put a hand on his arm. Her hand was trembling, but her grip was firm. No, Your Honor, she said, her voice a low, rough whisper. I do not, I have only the truth. And what is that truth? The judge asked, his voice not unkind. Raymond, he left us, she said, her voice shaking. He left us 2 years ago. We had nothing. He took all the money. He did not care about Leo. He did not care about any of them, not until I was in a position to provide for him, Raymond interjected, his voice smooth and sad. Your Honor, I was on business. I returned to find she had fled, taking my son. I have been searching for them ever since. That is a lie, Linda cried, her control snapping. He was... Miss Rock, the lawyer said, his voice like silk. Do you have papers? Do you have any document, any legal writ that gives you sole custody of this boy? Linda's face crumpled. No, I have... You have what, Miss Rock? I have my children, she whispered, her voice breaking. I have their lives. I have the nights I sat up with them when they were sick. I have the hands that fed them. I have the memory of him leaving us. That is what I have. The lawyer smiled, a sad, pitying smile. Your Honor, memories are not law. Sacrifice is not statute. The law, the paper, is clear. The boy belongs to his father. The judge looked at his desk. He looked tired. He looked at Linda, and his face was full of a sad, bureaucratic regret. Miss Rock, without any... Your Honor. The voice was thin, but clear. It came from the back of the courtroom. Everyone turned. An old woman was standing there, leaning on a heavy walking stick. She wore a simple, faded calico dress and a heavy wool shawl. It was Esther, the old widow who lived in the woods near the shack. Esther. Nate breathed. He had not summoned her. He had not even thought... Who are you, madam? The judge asked. His brow furrowed. I am Esther Miles, the old woman said, her voice gaining strength. She began to walk, her stick thumping on the wood floor. I live up on the ridge. I do not have papers, but I have ears. Raymond's lawyer stood. Your Honor, this is irregular. This woman is not a witness. She is now, the judge said, his eyes sharp. He looked at Esther. You have something to say? I do, she said. She stopped, not in the witness box, but in the center of the aisle. She pointed her stick, not at the judge, but at Raymond. I heard that man. I was in the trees. I see everything from my window. I saw the fight. I saw him on Mr. Callahan's porch. Raymond's face had gone pale. He was not asking for his son, Esther said, her voice ringing in the cold room. He was making a sale. That is a slander, Raymond's lawyer shouted. Quiet, the judge snapped. He was leaning forward. What did you hear, Miss Miles? I heard him. He was angry. He had been beaten, and he was yelling at the house. He said, I heard him plain. He said, I will not get $100 a kid for them now. The courtroom was so silent. The sound of a man's indrawn breath was like a gasp. Esther nodded, her chin set. That is what he said. $100 a kid. He was not looking for a son. He was looking for a profit. I have come a long way. I am an old woman, but I will not stand by and let a man sell children. Not in this territory. She turned, thumped her stick once, and walked slowly to a bench, where she sat, her duty done. The judge was no longer looking at his papers. He was looking at Raymond, his eyes 2 chips of ice. Mr. Raymond, is this true? It is a lie, Raymond sputtered. An old woman's fantasy. I have heard it as well, a new voice said. It was Taka. He had not been called. He just stood up. He walked to the front, standing beside Esther. He did not look at the judge. He looked at Raymond. I am Taka, of the Apsaluk, he said, his voice quiet, but filling the room. I do not know your paper law. I know the law of honor. I know the law of the mountains. Children are not property. They are not colts to be sold at market. They are the future. They are the heart of the people. He turned his gaze to the judge. I have watched. I saw this man, Raymond, send watchers to Mr. Callahan's land. I saw him plot. I saw him bring hired fighters. This is not the action of a father. This is the action of a thief. He then gestured to Nate. I saw this man, Nate Callahan, take a beating for a woman who was not his. I saw him go into the storm, a storm that killed trees, to pull 4 children from a broken house. I saw him give them his fire, and his food, and his protection. He asked for no paper. He asked for no payment. Take raised his hand, pointing at Raymond. The law may say that one child belongs to him, but the heart of this man is black. He would not raise a son. He would raise a slave. He pointed to Linda. This woman has fought the wind and the ice, and this man, her heart is strong. She has earned her children by the only law that matters. He finished. He stood, a pillar of quiet, absolute certainty. The judge was silent for a full minute. He looked at the papers, the birth certificate. He looked at Raymond, who was sweating. He looked at Esther. He looked at Taka. Finally, he looked at Linda. "Mr. Raymond," the judge said, his voice like gravel, "your petition is based on a lie. It is not a petition for custody. It is a plan for commerce. Miss Miles's testimony is compelling. The threat of violence, the clear intent to sell children. This court finds that you are not just an unfit father. You are a danger." "But the law," the lawyer protested. "The law," the judge snapped, "is not a shield for monsters. It is a tool for justice, and the justice in this room is clear." He stood. "The petition of Mr. Raymond is dismissed, with prejudice. Miss Linda Rock," he looked at her, his face softening, "is granted sole, legal, and binding custody of all 4 of her children, Nal, Tom, Leo, and Ruth. This court gives you this protection. I would advise you, Mr. Raymond, to leave Helena today." He banged his gavel. "This court is adjourned." It was over. Linda just sat there, her body sagging, a sound, a low, ragged sob, escaping her. Nate put his arm around her, and this time she did not pull away. She leaned into him, her face against his chest, and she wept. Nate looked over her head, his eyes meeting Take's. Take gave one slow, deep nod. They left the courtroom, walking past Raymond, who was a shrunken, gray-faced man, his lawyer already packing his briefcase. Esther was waiting. She patted Linda's arm. "You go home, child," she said. "You go home and raise those babies." The journey back to the ranch was long, the air cold, but the sun was on the snow. They were silent, exhausted, but a new, lighter silence, a silence of peace. They got to the ranch as dusk was falling. Jed and Martha saw them coming, and the door of their house burst open. The 4 children tumbling out, screaming, "Mama!" Linda fell to her knees in the snow, and they swarmed her, a tangle of arms and legs. Nal was crying. Leo was yelling. Tom and Ruth were just holding on. Nate watched, his heart a strange, full, aching thing. Jed clapped him on the shoulder. "A good day's work, son," he said. Nate nodded, his throat too tight to speak. He walked with Take toward the chicken coop. He had some feed. The chickens, which Linda had been caring for, would be hungry. He got there, and he stopped. "Take," he said, his voice flat. Take was already there, looking. The door to the coop was broken, hanging from one hinge. The small flock was scattered, 2 hens lying frozen in the snow. And on the door, scrawled in thick, black charcoal, were 2 words. "You lose." The victory, the peace, it all evaporated. Raymond had lost the law, but he had come back. He had gotten the last, spiteful word. Linda saw his face. She came over, her children still clinging to her. She saw the dead chickens. She saw the door. She saw the words. All the color drained from her face. "No," she whispered. "No, he cannot." Nate's jaw was a line of granite. The fight was not over. He had won the battle of paper, but the war for her peace, was still raging. He turned, his face a black mask of fury. "Take, the tracks!" Take was already kneeling. "1 horse," he said, his fingers brushing the snow. He rode hard, and he rode north. He is heading for the pass. He is a fool. He will not beat the dark. Take the children inside. Linda, Nate said, his voice a low command. Lock the door. Do not open it for anyone but me. Nate, what? I am going to town, he said, his voice like ice. I am getting the sheriff, and I am bringing him back. This ends tonight. He strode to the barn for his fastest horse. Taka did not follow. He just stood, watching the tracks in the snow, then melted into the pines, a silent, deadly shadow, moving far faster than a horse, heading north. They were in the house, the door barred, the children silent and afraid. For what felt like years, it was only 3 hours. A pounding on the door. Linda's heart stopped. Linda, it is me, it is Nate. She fumbled with the bar, opened the door. He was there, with the sheriff and 2 deputies, but he was holding a piece of paper. It is over, he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. He was holding a telegraph. The sheriff got the wire just as we were riding out, he said. The station at the North Pass. They caught him. Raymond. He was trying to flee, the sheriff said, pulling off his hat. But your friend, the Indian, he was faster. He got to the pass first, signaled the telegraph operator. They had him cornered. When Raymond saw them, he just broke. Nate held up the paper. He confessed, he said, his voice raw. He confessed to everything, the threats, the vandalism, the attempt to sell. He is in irons. He will not be coming back. Linda, ever. Nate lowered the paper. He looked at her. The war was over. Linda looked at him, at the paper, at the sheriff. Then her legs gave out. She sank onto the floor, put her head in her hands, and for the first time, she was not crying from fear or from pain. She was crying from a relief so deep, so profound. It was like the melting of a long, frozen river. The sun rose the next morning on a different world. It was a pale, watery, yellow light, the kind that follows a great fever. The ranch was buried, still and silent. But the silence was no longer the scream of the wind or the taut, terrible waiting for a threat. It was peace. Nate woke in his chair, his neck stiff, his ribs a dull, hot ache. The fire had burned down to embers. He had slept. He realized, for the first time in days, he had slept while she watched. He looked over. Linda was asleep in the other chair, a blanket pulled to her chin, her face, in the exhaustion of sleep, looking almost young. The deep lines of fear and worry had softened. He stood, his bones popping, and went to the window. The snow was a vast, blinding white sheet, 6 feet deep, smoothing all the hard edges of the land. And then he heard it, a sound he had never heard in this house, a high, thin peal of laughter. He looked down. On the front porch, which he had shoveled clean after the sheriff left, the children were playing. Leo and Tom were having a war, throwing handfuls of the light, powdery snow at each other. Nal was standing in the doorway, scolding them, but there was a smile on her face, and little Ruth, wrapped in one of his old coats so that she looked like a round, walking bundle, toddled to the edge of the steps and sat down, her face turned up to the pale, new sun. They were not afraid. The terror of the last few weeks, the fight on the porch, the night of the storm, it was fading, washed away by the bright, clean morning. Linda came to stand beside him at the window, pulling a blanket around her shoulders. She was holding 2 mugs of coffee. She handed one to him. Her hand was steady. She watched her children. Her eyes were still bruised with exhaustion, but the hollow, haunted look was gone. "They forget so fast," she whispered, her voice rough from sleep. "It is like it never happened." "They are children," Nate said, his voice a low rumble. He sipped the coffee. It was hot and strong. "It is what they do." They will, though, she said, her gaze distant. They will not remember the cold or the fear. But they will grow up, and they will know that their mother fought for them. Nate looked at her, at the proud, strong line of her jaw, the iron that had held her together. He turned his gaze back to the children, to the bright, sunlit snow. They will, he said, his voice quiet. And they will remember the man who opened his door. She was silent for a long moment. She did not look at him, but he felt her, a warmth beside him. Yes, she said, her voice barely a whisper. They will remember that, too. They stood in that comfortable, shared silence until their eyes fell on the same object at the same time, the ruined chicken coop, the broken door, the scattered feathers, the black, ugly words scrawled on the wood. You lose. It was a stain on the morning, the last hateful scar of a war that had been won. Nate set his mug down, his jaw tightening. I will burn it. No, Linda said, her voice surprisingly firm. You will not. We will not. We will fix it. He looked at her. He, she said, the word Raymond, a poison she would not speak, does not get to be the last thing. He does not get to break something and leave it broken. We will rebuild it. Nate held her gaze. He saw the iron. He saw the strength. He gave a single, slow nod. All right, Miss Rock, we will rebuild it. It took all morning. Nate found new, solid timber in the barn. He and Linda carried it out, their boots sinking in the deep snow. He took his axe and his hammer, and he tore down the broken door. He ripped out the splintered wood. Nal came out, her face serious. Ma, can I help? You can, Linda said, handing her a small canvas apron. You can hold the nails, straight. Leo and Tom, seeing a chance for destruction, came running. Can we hammer? Leo demanded. Nate looked at the 8-year-old, who vibrated with energy. He went to his workshop and came back with a smaller, lighter hammer. You can hammer the old boards, Nate said. For firewood, Tom, you can stack them. Tom, thrilled to be included, grabbed a piece of wood, mimicking his older brother. And Ruth, her face curious, toddled over. Linda laughed, a small, rusty sound. You, little one, you are the feather collector. She gave Ruth a small, woven basket. You find all the feathers? Put them in here, for a new pillow. They worked. It was a strange, new music for the valley. The sharp, solid ring of Nate's hammer, the lighter, faster thwack, thwack, thwack of Leo's, the serious, quiet sound of Nal handing nails to her mother, the small, happy noises from Ruth as she chased white feathers in the snow. They were a family. Nate found himself smiling. He was not a man who smiled, but he looked at Tom, who was trying to carry a board twice his size, his face a mask of pure, grunting determination, and a small, unfamiliar warmth moved in his chest. He and Linda worked side by side. They lifted the new frame together. Now, he said, and they hoisted it, his muscles straining, her body solid and capable beside him. They did not speak much. They did not need to. Their bodies moved in the easy, shared rhythm of a task that mattered. By late afternoon, it was done. It was not a coop. It was a small, solid fortress. The new pine boards were golden in the setting sun. The roof was sound. The door hung on new, heavy, black iron hinges. The smell of fresh sawdust and pine sap filled the air. Nate stood on the small porch he had added, testing a roof beam with his full weight, pushing on it. Linda came up beside him, her face smudged with dirt, her hair escaping its bun. Is it strong? She asked, her voice soft. It is, he said, his voice rough with tiredness. It will hold. It will keep the wind out. She leaned against the new support post, her head tilted, looking at the solid work, and then, in a small, unconscious movement of pure exhaustion and trust. She let her shoulder rest against his. Nate froze. He was so solid, so warm. She could feel the hard muscle of his arm through his wool shirt. He smelled of pine and cold air and sweat. He felt safe. She felt him tense, a sharp, sudden stillness. She pulled back, her face flushing, mortified. "I am sorry," she whispered, looking at the floor. "I am just tired." He did not move. He just looked at her, his face shadowed in the twilight, his eyes unreadable. The air between them was suddenly thick, charged. "It is all right, Linda," he said, his voice rougher than usual. He had never used her first name when it was not a command in a storm. She looked up. Their eyes met and held. It was not a look of passion. It was not a look of lust. It was something deeper and far more fragile. It was a look of profound, exhausted, grateful recognition. They had been through the fire. They had come out the other side, and they were, in this moment, the only two people in the world who understood. It was a promise, unspoken, but as solid as the beam he was leaning on. She broke the gaze first, clearing her throat. I should get the children inside. For supper." "Yes," he said, "you should." She turned and went, her children following her, a small, noisy cloud, back to the big house. Nate stayed, his hand still on the warm, new wood. Take found him there, sitting on the porch of the big house, his hat low, a block of pine in his hand. He was carving, the knife moving with a slow, steady precision. "It is a good house for a chicken," Take observed, sitting on the step below him. "It will keep the foxes out," Nate said, not looking up. Take watched the knife. "You are building many things. Nate Callahan, fences, coops." "I am a rancher," Nate said. "It is what I do." "No," Take said, his voice quiet. "You were a rancher. Now, you are a guardian." Nate stopped carving. He looked at the small shape in his hand. It was a rooster, its head high, its tail proud. The next morning, before the children were awake, Nate climbed a ladder and fixed the small, carved rooster to the peak of the new roof. It stood there, a small, proud, wooden silhouette against the pale yellow sky. When Linda came out, her hands wrapped around a coffee mug, she saw it. She just stopped and stared. She did not say anything for a long time. Nate came to stand beside her, his own mug in his hand. "He looks," she said, her voice thick, "like he is crowing." "He is," Nate said. "He is telling the sun to come up." She turned, and in a gesture so small, so fast, he almost missed it, she reached out and touched his hand, her cold fingers brushing his knuckles. You gave us hope, Nate." He looked at his hand, then at her. "It is just a piece of wood. Linda." "No," she said, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "It is not." Later that day, Jed and Martha arrived. They came not in a wagon, but on foot. Jed's shotgun slung over his back, Martha holding a covered dish. The woman who had once looked at Linda with such judgment now looked at her with a kind of fierce, maternal respect. We heard Raymond was gone for good," Jed said, clearing his throat. "He is," Nate said. Martha thrust the dish at Linda. "I made a pie," she said, her voice abrupt. "Apple. I made too much. You had best take it. It will not keep." It was a lie, a thin, beautiful, transparent lie. It was an offering. It was an apology. It was an invitation. Linda took the heavy, warm dish. The smell of cinnamon and apples rose. The smell of community. "Thank you, Martha," she said, her voice clear. We would be honored." The ice was broken. The town, which had once been a source of fear, was now, through Jed and Martha, becoming a source of strength. That evening, Take and Nate stood by the corral. Jet, the black stallion, trotted over, his leg fully healed, his spirit high. He nudged Nate's shoulder, looking for a treat. "Your horse is strong," Take said. "He has healed well. You have a good hand." "He is a fighter," Nate said, rubbing the stallion's nose. "He is like his master," Take said. He looked out over the vast, snow-covered valley. "You have much land. Nate, good land. Sheltered." "I do," Nate said, wary. "My people," Take said, his gaze distant. "Need good land. The winter is hard in the high country. The wind kills our old ones and our foals." Nate understood. This was business. "What are you proposing?" "Not a sale," Take said, his gaze sharp. "Not a trade, a sharing. The earth is our mother. She is not to be owned. She is to be respected." He proposed his plan. The crow horses, when the snows were heaviest, could come down and graze in Nate's sheltered valley, and in the hot, dry months of summer, Nate's herd could move up to the high meadows of the Absolute, where the grass was sweet and the water was cold. It was a plan of symbiosis, of trust, of a shared future. Nate, the hermit, the man who had built walls of mountains and solitude, looked at the big house. A light was on in the library. He could hear, faintly, the sound of Nal reading. He could smell Martha's apple pie. He turned back to his friend. He held out his hand. "Take, it is a good plan. It is a plan of honor." Take gripped his forearm, his hand strong and dry. "It is a plan of family." Linda, at the window, watched them. She watched the two men, one white, one crow, seal a bargain that was deeper than land. She looked at her children, safe by the fire, their bellies full of pie. She looked at the new solid chicken coop, the small, proud rooster on its roof, a guardian in the twilight. She was not running. She was not hiding. She was not, for the first time in her life, alone against the storm. She was home. The great mahogany house on the Callahan Ranch was no longer silent. The silence had been broken, not by the wind, but by life, and it seemed the old, dark wood of the walls was soaking it in, growing warmer from it. The sound of Nal's voice, clear and steady, had replaced the emptiness of the library. She sat every evening, her book open, reading to her brothers, her voice weaving stories that pushed back the shadows. The sound of Leo and Tom, a near-constant rumble of wrestling, loud whispers, and sudden, barking laughter, echoed from the barn or the hayloft. They were boys, and the ranch was a kingdom to be explored. And the sound of Ruth, a soft, happy babbling. A punctuated single word, Nate or Ma, followed the two people who were the center of her small, new world. The house, which had been a fortress of solitude for Nate Callahan, a tomb built of his money and his past, was now a home. It was loud, it was messy, and it was alive. Spring had come, not gently, but in a rush, as if to make up for the brutality of the winter. The snows melted. The valley floor turned from a stark white to a deep, rich green, and the creeks roared with life. Nate stood on his porch, his hand on the rail, his broken rib long healed but for a dull ache on the coldest morning. He watched Linda. She was in the small patch of land by the side of the house, a place that had been weeds for 3 years. She had tilled it herself, with a stubborn, fierce energy, turning the soil. Now, she was planting. She was on her knees, her hands in the dark, rich earth, pressing small seeds into the furrows. She was not the gray, haunted woman who had come for work. Her face was still thin, but the color had returned. The sun had found her. Her hair was tied back, and a small, genuine smile touched her lips as Ruth, her designated helper, dropped a seed potato into a hole with a look of profound, solemn concentration. Nate watched her. This woman who had survived the wind, the ice, and the cruelty of men. She was putting down roots. In his land, he had come to this valley, a man richer than a king, and he had been starving. He had believed that his wealth was his money, his land, his horses. He looked at Linda, her hands in the dirt, her face turned to the sun, and he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that he had been a fool. Wealth was not what a man owned. It was what he belonged to. It was the sound of a child's laughter in a room he had built. It was the sight of a woman planting a garden, a promise of a future, a harvest. He, Nate Callahan, the hermit, the millionaire, was finally, truly wealthy. He walked over, his boots silent in the soft earth. Ruth saw him. Her face lit up. "Nate!" she cried, and she launched herself at his legs, her small hands caked in mud, grabbing his trousers. He laughed, a rough, unused sound, and he bent, scooping her up. He settled her on his hip, as he had done 100 times in the last few months. She felt right, a small, warm, solid weight. He looked at Linda, who was watching them, her hand shading her eyes, her face soft. He turned his gaze to the small, round child in his arms. He looked into her eyes, which were her mother's, and he made his promise. Not in the thunder of a courtroom, but in the quiet of a spring morning. "This is your home now, Ruth," he said, his voice low. "From today, this is home for all of you." Ruth did not understand the words, but she understood the tone. She understood the safety. She reached up, her muddy, small hands wrapping around his neck, and she buried her face in his shoulder. A hug so tight, so full of absolute, childish trust, that it took his breath away. He held her, his hand on her back, and he looked at Linda over the top of her head. Linda's eyes were shining, and she did not look away. That evening, they sat on the porch. The children were asleep, their breathing a soft, steady rhythm from the open windows of the house. The air was cool and smelled of pine and the damp, clean earth of the new garden. Nate was whittling, his knife moving with its slow, familiar grace, carving a small, perfect horse for Tom. Linda was mending one of Leo's shirts, her needle moving in and out of the fabric with a quick, practiced rhythm. The silence between them was as comfortable as the old chairs they sat in. I dream sometimes," Linda said, her voice soft, not looking up from her work. Nate paused, his knife still. "Bad dreams?" he asked, his voice quiet. "About him?" "No," she said. "Not anymore." She took a breath. "Good dreams. I dream of hearing my name, a new name. I dream of Nal and Leo and Tom and Ruth, carrying a name that is strong and safe." She finally looked up, her face half hidden in the twilight. "I dream," she whispered, "of one day being called Linda Callahan." The words hung in the air, a brave, fragile, beautiful hope. Nate did not speak. He put his knife down. He put the small, unfinished horse down. He reached across the small space between them, and he took her hand, the one that was holding the needle. His hand was large, calloused, and warm. It dwarfed hers. She stopped breathing. He looked at her, and his face, so often a mask of control and solitude, was open and raw, and full of a feeling she had only just begun to believe in. He did not say yes. He did not make a grand promise. He just smiled. It was a slow smile, one that started in his eyes and moved, finally, to his mouth. It was a smile of such warmth, of such absolute, profound acceptance, that it was a better answer than any vow. It was a promise of a future, a home, a name. It was all she had ever wanted. She did not pull her hand away. She just turned hers over, and her fingers, thin and strong, laced with his, and they sat, in the gathering dark, their hands joined, and watched the stars come out. The summer brought the crow, true to their bargain. Take brought his people's herd to the high meadows, and a small, peaceful camp was set up by the river. The valley, which had been the domain of one man, was now a shared land. Nate learned. He, who had thought he knew horses, learned new ways from Take. He learned to break a horse not with force, but with patience, with a language of breath and weight. Take called it listening to the horse's spirit, and Nate, to his surprise, found that he could hear it. In return, Take learned. He learned the value of Nate's forge, the strength of a well-made iron hinge, the logic of a fence line that respected the water. Rather than fighting it, they worked. The two men and their two communities, White and Crow, not in a perfect, easy peace, but in a state of mutual, hard-won respect. It was a fragile, strong, sustainable future. One hot, bright afternoon, Nate stood by the paddock. He had been working with Jet. The stallion was whole. The scar on his flank was a long, silver mark, a memory, but it no longer pained him. His strength was back, his spirit unbroken. Nate opened the gate to the high pasture, 1,000 acres of green, rolling land. "Go on, boy," he said, slapping the horse's neck. "Be free." Jet tossed his head, his black mane flying. He tested his weight. Then, with a snort, he launched himself forward. He ran not from fear but from joy. He ran with a power and a grace that was the very spirit of the land. His black form flew across the green, a living shadow against the sun, his scars invisible in his speed. Nate watched him, his heart full. He saw the parallel. He saw the horse, wounded, trapped, scarred, and now, finally, free. He saw Linda. He saw the children. He saw himself. They had all been wounded. They had all been trapped by their pasts, by storms, by the cruelty of law and the failure of men. He thought of Raymond. He thought of the papers that had given a monster the power of the law. And he thought of what had beaten him. It was not a better law. It was not a piece of paper. It was Esther, an old woman with nothing but her ears. It was Jed and Martha, their shotgun and their old pistol, shaking in their hands, but held steady by their hearts. It was Take, a man of a different people, speaking a truth that was older than any court. The law, he knew, had holes. The West was too big, too raw, too full of shadow for paper to cover everything. But justice was different. Justice was the heart. It was the community, however small, that stood on a porch and said, "This is far enough." It was the courage to open a door in a storm. It was the spirit of the land itself, which demanded dignity and connection and the strength to stand for what mattered. He turned, the sun warm on his back. His gaze fell across the ranch. It fell on his house, the great stone house, its windows open, the sound of Nala reading drifting on the air. It fell on the valley, where the crow horses grazed beside his own. And finally, his gaze settled on the small, solid, new chicken coop. The new hens were scratching in the dirt, and on the peak of the roof, the small, carved, wooden rooster stood. It was just a piece of wood, but it was his promise. It was his declaration. It was a guardian, facing west, its head high, its silent crow greeting the setting sun. The light, a deep, golden, western light, cast over the new pine. It was a small, simple building, but it was a home. It was a sanctuary. It was a testament, built of wood and nails, and courage and love. It was a home that had been built to stand, and stand together, against any wind that dared to blow. Thank you for listening to this story from Wild West Tales. We truly appreciate you spending your time with us. Let us know where in the world you are listening from in the comments below. We love to see how far these tales travel. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to the channel, giving the video a like, and hitting that hype button. It helps these stories reach more listeners. just like you.